faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books worldwide.
Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're exploring the book It's Not Your Fault, subtitled Healing Childhood Trauma. Before discussing the book, let me share a story about childhood trauma. The story centers on a girl named Beverly Engel. Unlike most children welcomed by their parents, Beverly was conceived when her mother was raped. Despite this, her mother chose to have her. Yet, Beverly's existence constantly reminded her mother of the assault, leading to complete emotional neglect. This neglect subjected Beverly to emotional abuse. At age 9, never having known love, she was sexually assaulted. Afterward, she developed deep shame, feeling broken, dirty, evil, and unworthy of love. As an adult, this shame manifested in lifelong weight struggles, promiscuity, sadomasochism, and near-fatal alcoholism. Seeking change, Beverly connected with therapists, studied nonviolent communication and mindfulness, and through persistent effort overcame her shame to become a therapist and author. And today, Beverly is a renowned expert in emotional trauma, healing, and marriage therapy. With 35 years treating trauma in children and adults, she's published over 20 books in the field.
She's appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show and is considered the go-to expert for women in crisis.
Beverly found many trauma survivors share this deep shame, what she calls toxic shame. These individuals face higher risks of alcoholism, self-harm, and harming others compared to non-traumatized peers. To help others, Beverly wrote It's Not Your Fault, using self-compassion to overcome shame and reclaim life. Harvard psychologist Dr. Christopher Germer calls it an essential advancement in self-compassion theory and practice. The book is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, the author introduces us to shame caused by childhood abuse and emphasizes that only compassion can counter it. The second part presents the compassionate self-healing program and discusses obstacles and preparations needed before practicing self-compassion. The third part offers 5 self-compassion exercises to help you gradually overcome shame. Next, I'll interpret the book in 2 parts. Main topic 1, what is shame? 2, how to overcome shame. Let's start with the first part. What is shame? Acts like public urination, cheating on exams, or stealing can make people feel ashamed. Is this what the author refers to as shame?
No, the shame discussed here isn't temporary shame from a wrongdoing. It's about your internal self-assessment.
It's a feeling that makes you feel dirty, shameful, inferior, and worthless. It makes you deeply dislike yourself and believe you're unworthy of love. The author believes this shame stems from childhood trauma, specifically physical abuse and emotional abuse. Let's first discuss physical abuse. The author divides it into sexual abuse and violent abuse. Sexual abuse is easy to grasp. It can be non-contact acts, like exposing oneself to a child or forcing them to watch pornography, or contact acts like fondling, intercourse, or even child prostitution. Perhaps those who experience childhood sexual abuse are relatively few. What about violent abuse? Obvious forms include being punched, kicked, burned with cigarettes, slapped, or hit with objects like chopsticks, shoes, or books. Violent abuse also has a covert form, where, without direct contact, the child is made aware that non-compliance leads to violence. For example, threatening to abandon the child, scaring them by slamming doors, smashing things, reckless driving, or threatening to destroy cherished possessions. Now, let's look at emotional abuse, including neglect. For instance, caregivers ignoring infants crying without meeting their needs. Isolation. For example, locking a child at home, preventing them from playing with peers. Degradation, such as mocking a child in public for failing an exam. Corruption and instilling wrong values. For example, teaching children that only bribery gets things done, or parents constantly arguing, keeping children in a perpetually dangerous environment. If parents have distorted expectations for their children, that too constitutes covert emotional abuse. For instance, parents desperate for their child to pass the highest piano exam level quickly, forcing 7 or 8 hours of daily practice. When children consistently fail to meet parental expectations, their self-perception distorts, convincing them they're inadequate. And one college, of course, not everyone with similar childhood abuse experiences develops psychological issues.
But for some, especially severe abuse survivors, toxic shame develops. Never a single emotion, but a complex web of painful feelings.
First, it makes one feel humiliated. Sexual abuse or public punishment causes the most intense humiliation.
Second, it creates powerlessness. Children want to stop abuse, but feel helpless when unable. Furthermore, it brings feelings of inferiority and isolation. Abused children often feel like freaks, more worthless and incapable than others. Finally, shame causes self-blame and anger, as children believe they deserved the abuse. This constant self-blame and anger leads to involuntary isolation, a self-protective mechanism. These terrible emotional experiences from shame cause lifelong impacts. The author categorizes shame's impacts as severe effects and triggering effects. Severe effects include self-neglection, self-hatred, addiction, reenactment, abuse, and self-destruction. First, let's discuss self-neglect. Since abusers neglect victims' basic needs, shame-filled victims believe they don't deserve care, reenacting the neglect on themselves. For example, avoiding doctors when ill, chronically ignoring sleep needs. Self-hatred means despising oneself, feeling undeserving of goodness, rejecting kindness. Severe effects also include addictions like alcoholism, drug abuse, and gambling. Because these behaviors let them temporarily forget the shame, some abuse survivors reenact abuse, choosing partners like their abusers or becoming abusive themselves. Most severely, shame leads to self-destruction. They self-harm through cutting or burning and engage in dangerous activities like theft or drunk driving. Shame's triggering effects are milder but more common. For example, frequent childhood criticism makes adults hypersensitive to any perceived criticism. Even hearing "this dish needs more salt" might trigger defensive overreactions. Extreme childhood fear of mistakes can manifest as adult perfectionism, like obsessively organizing closets or proofreading reports until no punctuation error remains. Some constantly agree with others, even insincerely, fearing their opinions might invite humiliation. Others crave power, climbing corporate ladders or domineering at home, believing control prevents vulnerability. These shame effects can occur independently or intertwine. To reduce shame's impact, people naturally develop defenses against it. The author categorizes common defenses as passive or aggressive. Passive defenders withdraw, avoiding social situations, intimacy, and keeping everyone distant. When problems arise, they blame themselves, hating their perceived stupidity or incompetence.
They believe this avoids others' blame. Aggressive defenders are easily angered or constantly criticize others.
They attack first to prevent being demeaned. Some even inflict their childhood abuse onto others, transferring shame through humiliation. Hence the author writes, "I've never met an abuser who wasn't abused as a child." Defense strategy choice depends on gender, personality, family, and cultural factors. For example, extroverts often vent anger outwardly, while introverts hide rage and withdraw. Sadly, these strategies only temporarily ease pain without eliminating shame. So why is shame so hard to overcome? The author identifies 3 reasons. First, childhood abuse internalizes shame into core self-identity. During critical developmental years, feelings of humiliation, degradation, and worthlessness become deeply ingrained. Children believe their worthlessness is innate. They despise themselves and assume others share this contempt. They become hypervigilant, perceiving malice everywhere. So even when a coworker jokes, "Working overtime daily, your bonus must be huge," they'll obsess over hidden criticism, sinking into silent hurt or plotting revenge. Internalized shame fuses with their core being. Second, abuse survivors reject self-compassion. Abused children blame themselves, believing they deserve the mistreatment, like thinking, "I got beaten because I'm too stupid to pass exams." Thus, they feel undeserving of pity, let alone capable of fighting shame. Many survivors deny the abuse ever happened. A protective mechanism. Children naturally want to believe their parents love them. For severely abused children, admitting parental cruelty causes more pain than self-compassion. Acknowledging this truth feels worse than denial. But without acknowledging reality, self-compassion remains impossible. Nor can they shed the resulting shame. Shame persists stubbornly. Third, survivors habitually reject others' compassion. This may stem from cultural norms discouraging vulnerability and accepting pity. Recall disaster survivors interviewed on TV. They typically say, "We'll overcome and rebuild." Never. "Everything's gone. I'm breaking down." Similarly, abuse survivors feel that since it's in the past, they shouldn't wallow in self-pity, and being pitied by others is shameful. This makes it hard for them to face their shame directly. On the other hand, in the environments where childhood abuse survivors grew up, they were rarely encouraged or praised. As adults, they feel unworthy of kindness from others. They build walls around their hearts, not allowing any warmth to melt the ice. At the same time, they lock the shame inside. So how can we overcome shame? This is the second question we're addressing today. Based on her personal experiences and years of professional work, the author discovered that self-compassion can overcome shame. Self-compassion is the collective term for self-understanding, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance, self-care, and self-encouragement. So how exactly do we do it? The author believes that an important prerequisite for self-compassion is allowing oneself to feel the pain. Generally, those who suffered childhood abuse, especially severe abuse, often avoid recalling the past or re-experiencing the pain because they fear being overwhelmed by sorrow and getting stuck in the past. However, pretending to be fine doesn't mean you are. It's like covering a wound, which only causes it to fester. So you must first see and feel your pain to address it.
But when recalling the past, if overwhelming pain floods in, how can you pull yourself back?
The author offers a safe landing technique, which is actually a mindfulness method. Mindfulness originates from Buddhist meditation, helping you become aware of the present without judgment. And it can focus your consciousness on your body, preventing you from falling into the vortex of memories. Specifically, you can do this. Find a quiet, undisturbed place to sit. Take off your shoes, place your feet flat on the ground. Breathe calmly and feel the ground beneath your feet. During this, you can look around at your surroundings, such as the furniture in the room, the colors and textures of objects. If your attention drifts, refocus on feeling the ground beneath your feet. But this method only works for those who can feel their pain. But what about those who can't properly feel their emotions? Often, shame causes people to deny their past experiences. For example, not admitting that their father beating them severely was abuse, thinking it was because they were disobedient, or not acknowledging that a beloved teacher sexually assaulted them, believing it was mutual attraction. To address this, the author provides another method to confront the past. Imagine your abuse happening to your own child or another child you care about. In the text, the author mentions a client named John who was sexually harassed by his grandfather in childhood, but he never resented his grandfather because he always believed it was consensual between him and his grandfather, and he himself was depraved and dirty.
But when he imagined his own son being sexually harassed by his grandfather, he became furious.
Only then did he realize that if someone coerced his son into doing those things, his son would never consent willingly. He was just being manipulated by an adult using love. And so it was the same for him back then. Only at that moment did he see the truth clearly, weeping bitterly and filled with sorrow. His healing journey thus began, allowing him to feel the pain. Next, one can follow the 5 steps of self-understanding, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance, self-care, and self-encouragement to heal childhood trauma. The first step is self-understanding. Self-understanding is self-compassion. The most important step is to understand why you engage in behaviors that harm yourself and others. Although it may sound like making excuses for your wrongdoings, if you don't understand the deep reasons behind your alcoholism, drug use, abusing others, or self-harm, you will keep blaming yourself, continue feeling shame, and keep making mistakes. Here we need to introduce a concept: post-traumatic stress disorder, abbreviated as PTSD. Many childhood abuse survivors suffer from PTSD. They are mentally tormented, often have flashbacks, and feel alienated from society and others. Moreover, they also have corresponding physical symptoms, such as depression and substance abuse issues. However, some who suffered long-term childhood abuse may develop more severe complex trauma.
These individuals, besides having most problems of PTSD patients, are also more prone to extreme behaviors, such as self-harm, suicide, and even developing personality disorders. Now,
Why understand these? Because if you've suffered childhood abuse, understanding this helps you realize that although many of your actions make yourself and others feel wrong, it's actually your body and mind coping and adjusting. For example, your body knows that cocaine can help depressed people feel temporary happiness. Alcohol can temporarily distance people from anxiety and fear, while binge eating alleviates inner emptiness, frustration, and pain. When you connect your harmful behaviors to your abuse experiences, you'll realize you weren't born hopeless. Those unreasonable actions of yours are understandable. They were your coping mechanisms for anxiety, fear, and shame. Only by realizing this can you stop self-criticism, develop self-compassion, and move to self-forgiveness. Of course, if you've committed illegal acts, you should first face legal consequences. Yet even in prison, you might resist self-forgiveness, partly because you blame yourself for childhood abuse, believing constant self-criticism is deserved. But negative self-judgment prevents healing. Forgiving yourself allows breaking from the past. Your conscience argues forgiving your wrongs, betrays those you've hurt. But without self-forgiveness, shame recreates abuse cycles, making you resemble your abuser and continue harming others. So self-forgiveness also protects potential future victims. How then to forgive yourself? First, forgive your abused childhood self. As discussed, shame convinces survivors the abuse was their fault, blaming themselves for not resisting or leaving. To awaken self-empathy, observe a child your age during first abuse. Notice if they still need hand-holding to cross streets or help putting on coats. Imagine if they could survive without adults. The author's client, Ryan, always blamed himself for not resisting abuse. But after observing a 9-year-old boy, he realized his 9-year-old self lacked power to resist abuse or escape. He had no choice but compliance. From then, he finally forgave his younger self. Secondly, you must forgive yourself for harming others. Though difficult, the author offers several approaches. The first approach is acknowledging universal humanity, meaning imperfection is human and everyone makes mistakes. The second method is apologizing to those you've hurt. When you courageously admit faults, overcome fear, and apologize, you'll genuinely respect yourself. This self-respect then boosts your self-esteem and confidence, transforming self-perception. So apologies heal others while saving yourself. The third method is seeking forgiveness from authoritative figures. This authority could be divine power from your faith or respected, trustworthy individuals around you. Their forgiveness gives you courage to emulate this compassion. Having received external forgiveness, you've now completed self-understanding and self-forgiveness. The third step is self-acceptance, embracing yourself unconditionally despite imperfections. This is hard for abuse survivors who habitually self-reject. How can they accept? Thus, self-acceptance requires banishing negative self-judgment and cultivating self-encouragement. Everyone has an inner critic. For example, sending a wrong email might trigger internal blame. Thoughts like "I'm an idiot" when making mistakes, or "what's wrong with me" when losing things. This is universal but amplified in abuse survivors. Their upbringing often involved violence and emotional neglect. They absorbed constant criticism, internalizing these voices as their own. Over time, their inner voice became as cruel and demanding as their abusers. The author suggests two countermeasures. First, fierce rebuttal. When inner criticism surfaces, mentally shout back, "Shut up," or "Get lost." The fiercer the rebuttal, the more effectively it silences harmful voices. The second method is cultivating inner self-compassion. When that critical voice surfaces, simultaneously tell yourself, "No, you've done your best. Don't be discouraged. Everyone makes mistakes." Beyond this, self-acceptance requires setting realistic goals because parents or adults imposed unreasonable expectations and punishments when you fell short as a child. You now hold yourself to impossible standards, like demanding you quit smoking or drinking in 2 days, or never yelling at your children. The author suggests setting slightly lower, written goals based on self-understanding. For parenting, you might write, "Expecting myself to never get angry at my child is unreasonable." A more reasonable goal is avoiding cruel words and physical punishment when angry. Once you achieve unconditional self-acceptance, move to the fourth step, self-care. We initially learn self-care from those who loved us, like wrapping ourselves in soft blankets because mom tucked us in, or soothing with warm drinks because she brought warm milk. But if your parents only gave neglect or abuse, who teaches you self-care? The author shares her experience. Neglected by her mother, she first felt care at age 9. That year, her neighbor's daughter visited from Alaska. Though only staying 2 weeks, she treated the author with exceptional kindness. This aunt invited her for cookies and milk, listened intently to school stories, and gifted her a scarf before leaving. This precious experience became the blueprint for her self-care practice. She practiced before a mirror, mimicking the aunt's kind words, attentive listening, and affirming nods, gradually learning gentle self-treatment. So, the author suggests recalling your own care experience, however brief, and replicating those actions toward yourself, like imitating a teacher's encouraging words or a masseuse's gentle touch with scented oils. Moreover, you can try to recognize and write down things your parents or others did in your childhood that made you feel unloved. Then treat yourself in the opposite way. For example, your father was extremely impatient with you as a child, constantly rushing or scolding you no matter what you did. This made you feel incompetent. By writing this down, you realize that being patient with yourself in daily life is a form of self-care. If self-care helps alleviate the stress and anger from shame, then the final step of self-encouragement can transform that shame into motivation to achieve your goals. Why is self-encouragement so important? Imagine when learning to drive, which kind of instructor would you prefer? The one who constantly criticizes sharply or even insults you, or the one who keeps encouraging and cheering you on? I believe most people prefer to hear encouraging voices because encouragement helps them stay motivated and persist. So how can you self-encourage? First, you need to acknowledge your limitations so you don't have to think you're a failure just because you didn't finish college or become a leader, because just overcoming childhood shame is hard enough. Second, you should recognize the efforts you've made to improve. You might write them down on paper, such as, "I'm proud that I endured abuse without abusing others," or "I'm proud that I take care of my health." Then you should reward yourself promptly when you make progress. All encouragement involves rewards. Rewards can come in various forms. For example, you could reward yourself with new headphones after a week without alcohol, or a relaxing bubble bath after half a month without sarcasm towards your child. Self-encouragement gives you the courage and strength to keep going. At this point, the main content of the book is essentially covered. Although the self-compassion healing method introduced in this book is primarily based on the author's personal experiences, Recent years have seen increasing research confirming its effectiveness. IMPR. Academic papers on self-compassion have been published in international authoritative psychology journals like Contemporary Psychology. So, research shows that receiving care and kindness in childhood has profound effects on brain and body development, even influencing the expression of certain genes. Self-compassion also has positive effects on treating depression, anxiety, and stress relief. Higher levels of self-compassion correlate with lower risks of mental illness. This happens because self-compassion triggers oxytocin release, a hormone that enhances feelings of safety and calm. Recent neurobiology research further proves self-compassion stimulates new neuron and synapse growth, helping repair shame-related memories. No one chooses their birth. If you were born into a family filled with coldness and violence, or if shame led you astray, this isn't your fault. Your journey has been incredibly difficult. But starting today, you needn't carry others' expectations or care about their judgments. As self-compassion guides you from shame's quagmire, you'll discover you're not broken or dirty, but a whole, dignified being worthy of love. All right, that concludes our interpretation of It's Not Your Fault. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.